President Biden has his big boy press conference, and it's just good enough to keep him on the ticket, which is a nightmare for Democrats and music to the Trump campaign's ears. We're going to get into all the details in just a moment. Plus, how do you mistake Vladimir Zelensky for Vladimir Putin? Well, if you're Joe Biden and you have mashed potato for brains, it's easy. And we'll talk about that too. Plus, who's the running mate gonna be? JD, Marco, somebody nobody's even talking about? And joining us on the roundtable today to discuss those items and more, Elaine Parker, Chief Communications Officer at Job Creators Network. Gabe Kaminsky, investigative reporter at Washington Examiner, and Republican Operative Alec Sears. We're going to bounce it around the roundtable coming up right now. And we begin this week, as we always do, with Speaker Mike Johnson. He appeared on This Week on the Hill at Salem News Channel. And of course, he was asked the question that everybody's asking: what are we going to do about President Biden?
The conversation this week on the Hill is sort of naturally it evolved into this question about the evoking the 25th Amendment. The fourth clause of the 25th Amendment has never been used in our history, but we're in unprecedented times. And as that clause goes, the vice president has the responsibility to begin a conversation with the cabinet of the president to determine, in their view, and in good faith and their good conscience, if the president has the ability to continue to lead. If he is incapacitated in some way, lacking mental acuity, by way of example, that endangers the country, then they have a responsibility under the Constitution to take action. And they're not doing that, of course. They're doing the opposite. They've dug in to defend him. And we've, I think, rightfully brought this issue into the conversation. And you've heard a lot of House and Senate Republicans talking about that issue. I was asked the question, if you were in the cabinet, if you were serving in the Biden cabinet, which is a wild hypothetical because I'm in a different party and we don't agree on anything, but let's just say hypothetically you were there, would you, in good conscience, be thinking about evoking the 25th Amendment? And I answered instantly and honestly, of course I would, because I see what everybody sees. And then it doesn't believe anybody in that cabinet is going to do the same thing, but they asked me what I would do, and that was my answer.
So, Elaine, we'll start with you. These are unprecedented times, and we've never really faced this before as a nation. What is the speaker's responsibility here, and for that matter, the Republican majority?
I mean, unprecedented times. It's hard to tell someone who's in those shoes right now what they should be doing. And this is tragic from a family standpoint. I mean, watching a family go through this and have to deal with it, it is tragic because these are when people are going through dementia and they're being diminished like this, and whatever you want to call it, dementia, Alzheimer's, it's tragic to watch.
Yeah.
But from that standpoint, it's a tragedy. From the standpoint of the administration, the White House, the staff, the cabinet secretaries, and mostly the media, the American people deserve honesty. They deserved to not have a cover-up. They deserve to have true honesty if there was a problem. And many of us were watching it and saying, wow, I recognize that. I've got personal experience in seeing those kinds of things. And to not, to try to hide it, and the lengths that have gone through to try to hide this until they simply couldn't, is simply irresponsible. And I don't think the American people should forgive them anytime soon. In particular, I think the American people should hold the media responsible because they have a responsibility to report honestly to them, and so that we can all make decisions for ourselves. Because think about it, if you were a Democratic primary voter, had you known, had you been getting the true story from the shows that you were watching, would you have voted the way that you did? I mean, that's the big question here. I can't tell them what to do. I don't know. I mean, I think that the Republicans really should just sit back and wait and see what happens and continue talking about the policies that they want to put forward that will help the American people. Because right now, the policies in the Democratic Party are an abject failure.
And in an election year, I don't think anybody expected a whole lot of major legislation to go through at this time anyway. However, there are affairs of state that need to be attended to. And the American people deserve to have a full-time functioning executive in that branch of government. Gabe, Elaine just used the word cover up. Is that how you would characterize what the media has done here? Because it's pretty amazing to see them pretend like they're just now noticing what we've all sort of noticed and talked about it for several years now.
Yeah, I would say in some respects, we're certainly seeing that the president has deteriorated significantly, right, since 2020, and in ways that I think we were all inevitably surprised by. I mean, he referred yesterday to the president of Ukraine as Putin, right? He called
Yeah.
his vice president, former President Donald Trump. So I think, it's certainly surprising in some respect deterioration, but let's be honest, this is an extenuation of who we've seen the past 4 years. I mean, this is the guy who's been falling down stairs, falling off his bike, referring to European leaders by the wrong names. So I think that us in conservative media aren't necessarily as surprised as our counterparts in left of center media, or rather, they're not actually surprised as much. They just finally found the opportunity, and it's safe now to write all about Biden negatively.
Alec, you saw Speaker Johnson there sort of trying to delicately work through this. There are constitutional concerns here and certainly political concerns, but at the same time, it is a delicate topic to have to raise in such a brazen way that this man doesn't appear to be capable of doing his job. How does this register with younger voters, do you think? Is there sympathy here, or is it just sort of, let's get to work here and let's call a spade a spade?
Honestly, I think you'd have a hard time finding any young voter that has sympathy for any politician, really, let alone, a president that has so clearly lost a huge step. I mean, this is not the same Joe Biden as in 2020, maybe even the same Joe Biden as in 2022. He's just slipping so quickly down this road. And we've seen Dems, every time a Democrat is in trouble, the party typically circles the wagons around that Democrat really quickly. And that's generally what has happened since the debate. But now it's gotten so bad and so obvious that certain members of the party are starting to come out and they're cutting their support back. They're not buying it anymore.
Yeah, and again, listen, we've got much more to talk about in this regard throughout the rest of the program, but I will bring it back to Elaine here in terms of the affairs of state and things that need to get done. It would be nice to be able to see some cooperation on Capitol Hill and address some of the major issues that are still sort of plaguing our economy and dragging us down. From a job creators network perspective, have you sort of lost hope that anything's going to happen until after the election?
I think that that's a given, whether we had the issues going on with President Biden or not in an election year. You said it yourself, there's just not much that's going to happen between now and the election. I think most people are looking at what can we do in a post Biden administration environment, and how can we get the economy back on track so that we're helping small businesses, so that we're bringing down inflation, making housing more affordable, bringing down the cost of gas, all of the things that have just gotten out of control under this administration as a result of the government overreach and the excessive and reckless spending that's gone on. I think that's kind of where we're at, is what do we do post-election?
Do you think there's stomach at the cabinet level, as Speaker Johnson alluded to toward the end of that clip we just showed on This Week on the Hill? Do you think that there may be a few cabinet members who are going to step forward and actually trigger something close to a 25th Amendment action?
I guess I'm doubtful that there isn't already conversations happening on a timing perspective on Biden stepping down. I don't think he's going to be the candidate as much as he wants to be and believes that he's the best person to govern this country. I think that he just hasn't actually accepted it. He's not going to be the candidate. The pressure is rising more and more. I mean, again, I'll go back to the media and holding them responsible. Now they're all admitting to it and acting in such shock of what they've seen, but they've seen this. I mean, Chuck Todd from NBC on his own podcast said 2 years ago he knew this, that a high-level cabinet official had told him this. So they knew this was happening. And this is something that's very hard to diagnose. I mean, it's just not something you just diagnose. And so what they kept saying was, these videos are being exaggerated and they're cheap fakes, and there's no proof because there's not a diagnosis. Well, of course there's not a diagnosis. I mean, I have family members that haven't been officially diagnosed, but my gosh, they have dementia. They have been diminished, and there are things that they can't do and handle for themselves anymore.
Yeah, it is interesting. The pro-science crowd doesn't recognize that observation of the data set in front of you is part of the scientific process, and we've all been observing this data set. But we'll see. That's a bold prediction, Elaine, that you don't think he's going to be the nominee. We've got more to discuss on this, but one thing is for certain. Ultimately, whether Joe Biden is the nominee for the Democrats or not will come down at this point, it appears, to one man's decision, and that's Joe Biden himself. There are nearly 30 million small business owners in America, and they employ 60 million American workers. No organization does a better job defending them on Capitol Hill and in states across the country than Job Creators Network. And never before has small business owners needed more defending. Heavy regulations, high inflation, higher interest rates, and higher taxes, all caused by the policies of the Biden administration. They aren't just crushing hardworking American families, they're crushing hardworking small business owners across America too. The lifeblood of our communities and driving force of our economy. So if you own a small business, if you work for a small business, or if you care about your local small businesses, you need to join the fight and support and defend them. Become a JCN freedom fighter. Go to joinjcn.com. There's no cost to you on this, and it's going to really help Main Street business across the country. Learn how you can support your local small business and defend the American dream itself. Go to joinjcn.com right now. That's joinjcn.com. Joe Biden closing out the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. that he hosted, introducing President Zelensky from Ukraine.
Says loudly and clearly. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
It was actually deftly handled by Zelensky in that moment, but boy, the gasp, not just in that room, but across the country of anyone who was watching this. Elaine, a lot of people are just saying, listen, it can happen. It happens a lot. I get that. But for the last decade, they've been telling us that Vladimir Putin is Hitler. How do you accidentally call someone Hitler, Elaine?
Yeah, the gasp of when I was watching that, I couldn't believe it. And when I watched it back again, I thought, oh my goodness, if he hadn't caught himself and Zelensky had to walk up and make the correction.
Oh man.
Just so horrible, just how horrible that was for everybody. But again, it's just tragic. But tragedy aside, the reality is what the American people need to remember is that just having a new candidate on the Democratic ticket does not solve the problem of failed Democratic policy. Remember, all Democrats will believe in continuing the inflationary spending. All Democrats will continue with the government overreach and regulatory onslaught that has hurt our small businesses. And all Democrats believe in allowing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act to expire.
True. Alec, this moment, though, beyond it just being sort of, maybe a slip up, maybe a understandable mistake when you got Putin on the mind, it demonstrated for everybody that how serious this is because he's on the world stage. He's representing us at such a high level, and he can do something like this. It sort of, in my opinion, raises the stakes even more on the problem with the president.
Yeah, he's standing like in front of a very large delegation of NATO members and politicians from various countries that are members of NATO. I made a kind of a clip yesterday of a different camera angle than what we viewed of all the reactions from these NATO politicians, and they're politicians, so they're all pretty stoic and handle it pretty well. There are a couple of like very shocked reactions of what is essentially somebody had happened to tweet yesterday that Joe Biden introducing Zelensky as Putin is kind of like somebody introducing Winston Churchill as Adolf Hitler
Yeah.
right before a speech. It's ridiculous. And the reactions from these NATO politicians were stunned, with one guy looking off stage to his handlers like, did I hear that right? Am I like getting a bad translation or something? It's
Yeah.
so crazy.
Yeah. Gabe, do you take this as just, a understandable verbal flub, or do you think this is another example of the brain of the president sort of malfunction? That's the word that we've been using a lot. He malfunctioned again. He malfunctioned.
Well, it's obviously, this is not an isolated circumstance. It's
right.
increasing. There's perpetual situations in which he's saying things that are incoherent. And I think Alec made a good point, which is this is on the world stage. Our foreign adversaries are watching. We have an intensifying conflict in the Middle East, where our ally Israel is being attacked by pretty much on all sides by Iran-backed proxies. And then you have China and Russia who are all watching, and they certainly see a president who doesn't seem like he can string together a few words. So it's obviously problematic. It's obviously, people are laughing at it. It's comical, but it obviously is very serious, and it's problematic.
Yeah. And Elaine, it also points out that all the questions and answers that the president has engaged in since his debate 2 weeks ago, whenever he demonstrates how he's fine and he's on top of his game, he always focuses on foreign policy issues. He points to NATO, he points to Europe, he points to China. And I think that also points into a pretty stark example of the fact that he's ignoring things here at home. You just talked about the Democrat policies and the inflationary spending and the problem with crime in our streets and the lack of consumer confidence. That's not even on his radar right now, it doesn't seem.
I mean, he's been immersed in it obviously for several days now, and so that's what he's pulling from as his most recent memory to talk about. But sadly enough, when he was asked about the Israel conflict with Palestine yesterday, he didn't even mention the American hostages that are still being held, which was very saddening to me to hear, is that he wasn't acknowledging that at all and was focused on many other issues surrounding it, and aid to Gaza and ceasefire and things like that. But what about the Americans that are still held there? But he does ignore the domestic policies because, he believes that things are going well. Remember, there are 16 or 17, Nobel Prize winning economists that have told him his stuff works and that people are doing great as a result of his policies. And it just isn't the truth. The American people just aren't buying that narrative because they have to go to the grocery store every week. They have to fill up their gas tanks. And all of those things, there's an affordability crisis that Americans are dealing with, and that's going to continue whether Joe Biden is still the president or some other Democratic person takes his place at the top of the ticket. Those policies will continue, and the affordability crisis will continue.
Alec, you mentioned the video that you got of the different angle of that moment. There was another moment later in the day at his press conference. We're going to show it now because it's another example of what is just bizarre, strange, and can be described as his brain malfunctioning. I don't know if you saw this. Take a look, and maybe you can help explain it to me.
I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and...
What was that? Did he see somebody and start engaging with them in the middle of the sentence? Did you see that?
I actually hadn't seen that part of his press conference until just now. I caught a playback of a lot of the clips yesterday on Twitter, but that's a new one for me. It's almost like he may have seen someone in the audience, like maybe getting up and leaving, and he got a little upset about it, or it could be that he's just hallucinating a person there, and then starts talking about Japan and South Korea. I mean, maybe he's trying to segue into some discussion about microchips and processors.
Yeah,
when it comes to dealing with NATO and allies and foreign adversaries like China, just a total out of
again. Since you're just seeing it for the first time, maybe a lot of our viewers are too. Let's watch it one more time.
Korea. I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea.
Seriously, Gabe, maybe it was he's got an earpiece and they were like feeding him something and he got distracted by it. I am dumbfounded by it, but this is the kind of thing that freaks me out. I think a lot of us out about his behavior.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Larry. I'm not going to purport here to be a Biden whisperer. I frankly did not understand anything he just said there. I don't really even know what to say about that clip because it was completely incoherent. I think it's demonstrative of what we're seeing from the president. I mean,
yeah. Well, we'll file it under the president's brain is malfunctioning when you call Vladimir Zelensky Putin and then you immediately in the middle of the sentence get distracted by God knows what. It's disconcerting to say the least. And by the way, that's coming off of a day where we're told he turned things around and made things better. This is better, everybody, and you will accept it. Well, when the president had his big boy press conference yesterday, he kicked things off with a reference to his running mate and Vice President Kamala Harris, but it didn't go exactly as planned.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president because I think she was not qualified to be president. I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president because I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one. The fact is that the consideration,
I really do enjoy watching Anthony Blinken's reaction to that.
Wouldn't have picked
By the way, this is also noteworthy. The White House has officially edited the transcript of those remarks. As you can see, they show that he did in fact say Trump. It's been struck through, and Harris has been put there in brackets just in case anybody was worried about what he actually meant by that. Elaine, at that moment, did you sort of think, oh boy, here we go. It's going to be a roller coaster, this press conference?
Yeah, it was kind of how I felt the night of the debate as we were getting started, and it just was a disaster from the first sentence that he spoke. But look, since that debate, the stress that he must be under, so he's already diminished, tragically, but every time he gets on the world stage or in an interview or giving a speech, if he doesn't have that teleprompter in front of him, the stress that he's feeling must just exacerbate everything. And so to mix up somebody's name, I mean, you and I probably do that all the time, or, sort of forget something or can't pull that name, top of our head or whatever. No one thinks you and I are diminished. We just are having that moment where you can't pull it from the top of your head. Mm-hmm. But all it does is add to the narrative and add to the problems. And it shows that the stress is also getting to him.
So you've mentioned that you don't think he's going to be the nominee. How do you think this transpires? Because I agree with you. And again, I do have some sympathy for the fact that every time he is going to be seen now making a public statement, all eyes are just going to be transfixed and waiting for it to be another, Titanic of a disaster like it was at the debate. And you can't have that as a politician and a public figure. So what happens here? Is this a behind the scenes deal that's being made with him, or will it be a more public sort of knives out situation?
The Democrats, as much as they want to protect democracy, they tend to do and bend rules in any direction that ensures the end result that they want. So I wouldn't put it past them to make this some sort of a backroom deal. And they've got a challenge on their hands, obviously, with Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first African-American woman to be vice president. And they're going to have to contend with her if she is not the choice that they want to put in his place. Because of their, intense support for DEI policies. And that's going to be problematic for them because she is going to be in a powerful position to demand that position.
Yeah, diversity for diversity's sake is how Kamala Harris became vice president. So it is kind of rich and ironic to see everybody openly talking about moving her to the side now. Gabe, the moment when Joe Biden called his vice president Trump, what ran through your mind?
Larry, I had me thinking, I think we could have a unity ticket. I think this would be great for everyone. These are the two people everyone wants. I think, put Trump at VP, Secretary of State J.D. Vance. In all seriousness, I mean, again, I think Christine made a good point. It illustrates the the increasing pressure that the president's facing. I mean, he, again, like we've said, he has been making verbal missteps since 2020, and of course, it obviously is getting a lot worse. And I think he is now facing most of the press that is putting the pressure on him, that is writing antagonistic stories, that is trying to ask him tough questions. George Stephanopoulos was a pretty tough interviewer for him, and he faced scrutiny from ABC for that, unsurprisingly. But so yeah, he's facing a lot of pressure. And as far as a backroom deal, I don't know exactly what that looks like as far as pushing him aside, but it's notable that there are a lot of White House aides and staffers who are leaking to the press. And the question is, how much of those aides are actually working for Kamala Harris or Kamala Harris herself?
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of these leaks that we're getting right now are probably people who are trying to line up for a better position in the Harris administration. Alec, Biden calling his vice president Trump, though, just for the value of the meme quotient here that will be built out exponentially for several weeks. That was gold, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it is gold from a campaign perspective. I mean, it's funny. It's perfect campaign fodder that's going to be in every mashup from now until the convention. But it shouldn't be, honestly. Like, again, this is Biden just after a big NATO speech on the world stage, flanked by NATO leaders. He's got his Secretary of State and other officials in the front row, obviously reacting very negatively to his gaffes. So even they can't hide it anymore.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that, like I said, like they just can't hide it anymore. Like for years, this the condition of Joe Biden was hidden by his staff, his cabinet, and the media themselves. And now that all of a sudden you just flat out can't hide it anymore, I don't think that we should be congratulating journalists for all of a sudden doing their job,
Oh,
what they should
hell
have been
no.
doing for the past 2 years.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, let's pick up on that, Alec, because I want to show you another clip. Because all these journalists, they say, oh, they were hiding this from us. They're hiding. No, they weren't. No, they weren't at all. It was right there. We've been talking about it. They didn't get it wrong. They chose not to acknowledge what everybody saw. Here's another example. This is just from the press conference last night, but you could put this montage together for the last 4 years. Watch.
Look, folks, this is well, anyway, in the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling in the 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway, it wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
All right. And thank you for Fox News for putting together that montage. But I got to be honest, my father is 87 years old and he has Alzheimer's. This is a thing he does too. There's so many millions of Americans who are seeing this right now, Alec. And he uses this anyway thing, number one, when he can't remember what he was saying, or when he goes down a path to say something that he knows he shouldn't say, and then he stops himself and says anyway. But that anyway, we've been seeing that anyway for years now. The reporters, the media, they've ignored it willfully because they're on his side and they don't want to point out something that makes him look vulnerable. That's really what's at play here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the journalists and the media are just taking the White House and the government at their word. What happened to investigative reporting, or just simply asking like a probing question? They don't want to somehow make angry the White House or the Biden campaign, and then ruin that like great relationship that they have, and then get absolutely torched in the newsroom later by all the Democrat activists that work there.
Yeah, speaking truth to power is what the reporters are supposed to do, Gabe. Those are your colleagues. You're a reporter. Are there things right now that you're seeing transpire that you think deserves some sort of reckoning for the press, or do you, being a member of the media and being a liberal means never having to say you're sorry?
Well, what's happening, right? Like we've been talking about on this program, we've been talking about for weeks now in conservative media, is that legacy media, they didn't wake up to Biden's problems. Maybe in some respects they finally something clicked for them, but Biden has displayed a lack of mental stability for several years now. And the fact that they've ignored this story, this is part of a trend that we've seen for a long time with the legacy media, whether it be the Hunter Biden laptop, whether it be reporting in conservative media about the idea that COVID-19 emerged from the Wuhan lab, whether it be the Russian collusion hoax with the Steele dossier and that being linked to Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. So for any number of stories, or that the notion that Hunter Biden's laptop, the Politico letter, I guess I mentioned that, but this is a common trend, and it should be a reckoning. It absolutely should be. Unfortunately, I don't think that legacy media outlets and those journalists view it in the lens of them neglecting these stories. I think they view it in the sense of that, the White House has been, in some respects, right? It's true. They've been shielding this. They've been hiding Biden away. That is true. But they have also not been asking tough questions, and they've done a great disservice to Americans by doing that.
Well, that's true. I mean, Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd's faux outrage this week of things that we've seen going on for years was really something rich to behold. It's and let's face it, half of the things that you just noted about the Russian collusion and the dossier, and they won awards for their coverage of those stories. Forget about actually having a reckoning on the truth of those stories, which reminds me also of something that I want to bring up. Anyway, as if the bad news cycle wasn't bad enough for Joe Biden, CNN got an exclusive on something else that is frankly terrifying. Take a look.
According to two sources, before cabinet meetings that the president attends, cabinet officials will submit their questions and key talking points and bullet points that they plan to present to the president in these closed door meetings. This is how one source described it. They said the entire display is kind of an act. They would come and say, hey, the president is going to call on you about 25 minutes in and ask this question. What are the bullet points that you'll respond with? Now, the White House's defense has been that is standard practice for any administration. They said in a setting like this, you never want the president to be not aware of what is going to be discussed. They want to also just be mindful of the president's time. But we also spoke with sources from the Obama years who said in the cabinet meetings for former President Barack Obama, those were never this meticulously scripted.
Meticulously scripted. Add to that story the fact that we've learned that the last cabinet meeting was 9 months ago. And even then, those cabinet meetings are, as you just heard, meticulously scripted. This is not a functioning White House, Elaine. It's interesting that everybody's discussing about whether President Biden is capable of being on the ticket and running for office, winning election, and providing 4 more years. Shouldn't the real question be whether he's capable of carrying out the job today?
Well, I think what it shows is he hasn't been meeting with his cabinet on a regular basis over the last almost 4 years. I've read reports that President Trump had weekly meetings with his cabinets, secretary cabinets, and it begs the question: who has been running the country? Who is making the decisions? Who is deciding on our foreign policy, on our domestic policy, on our economic policy? If Biden is not making these decisions and these are so scripted, who's writing the script is the biggest question I would ask.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and frankly deserves some congressional oversight, in my opinion, as we've been discussing, what's Congress do in a situation like this? Maybe they should start having hearings, Elaine, to say, so how's the White House functioning right now? I mean, that is oversight of the executive branch. It is part of their job. Maybe they could get to the bottom of who's actually making decisions and who's deciding to script these cabinet meetings. Is that appropriate?
Absolutely. And back to the media's responsibility. I mean, these are all things that the media could have questioned about. I mean, they look at the schedule every single day of the president and the vice president. We know when they're having lunch together. Why don't we know when they're having cabinet meetings, discuss the world events and the country's events and what's happening in the country and how they're going to solve the big problems for the American people? Again, the media, it was just not doing its job. And they shouldn't be congratulated for suddenly standing up and saying, oh my gosh, I mean, we can't have this happen and he must step down. They've known it all along. All along they've known it. And the cabinet secretaries, if they haven't met with their president in 9 months, what are they doing? I mean, who are they reporting to? It's just a a rudderless ship.
Great point. And it also explains why so many things are kind of broken and non-functioning right now. Gabe, cabinet meetings, few and far between, and when they do have them, they're scripted, like a Potemkin village of a cabinet meeting just for cameras. Are you surprised to hear this? As dysfunctional as this White House seems, I was surprised at this.
I actually was not as much surprised at that, particularly because there has been reporting in the past of prior administrations with cabinet meetings being scripted. Obama's transportation secretary in 2015, Ray LaHood, he had said actually that something along the lines of, I think the quote was, he said, cabinet meetings are all for show prior to him resigning eventually. But I will say, I don't know if that was a widespread phenomenon in the Obama administration. And it's interesting, CNN said they spoke to sources in the Obama administration. But with regard to this administration, this is completely par for the course. We saw that in press conferences, particularly yesterday, Biden pre-planned every single reporter they're going to call on, to the ire of, maybe reporters at right of center outlets who might have other ways of looking at questions. Or we even look at what happened with the controversy, I believe it was last week in Philadelphia, where the White House fed questions to a radio host in Philadelphia. The radio host asked those exact questions word for word and then was later fired. So there's a trend in this administration of scripting things, of keeping Biden as sheltered away from the public and from, I think, cabinet secretaries who could, begin to have some interpretations of exactly how much this commander in chief can lead.
Yeah, and by the way, it should be noted that even with that Philadelphia radio interview, that the questions had been scripted and pre-approved, President Biden still messed up the answer to one of the questions. But Alec, I remember Trump cabinet meetings. Sometimes they would have the cameras rolling for the first 15, 20 minutes of these things, and we'd see it live. They were pretty freewheeling affairs.
Yeah, very freewheeling, like you said. They would have cameras in there, and then they'd kick the press out and get down to real business. I think these scripted cabinet meetings are just par for the course, like Gabe said, for the Biden administration. I mean, he said that he was going to have weekly or monthly lunches with Kamala, his vice president. They've had like 5 total during the entire presidency. Democrats really want to like save democracy. That's like their really terrible tagline. His administration is not a democracy. The Biden family and the Biden White House works like an oligarchy. The Dem Party works like an oligarchy. Their own party rules favor an oligarchical structure with their super delegates and the way that they structure their convention, so that there can really be only one winner, and it's whoever the Democrat establishment chooses. I mean, we
Elaine,
have.
Yeah. Sorry, Alec. Elaine raised the question, it begs it. Who's really running things? We had CNN also say that there's reason to believe that Barack Obama is pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Barack Obama still lives in Washington, D.C. He said he was going to stay here because his daughter was graduating high school. That was years ago. He's still here. Is it too far-fetched to think that this is really, I mean, it's been said out loud many times. Alec, we'll start with you. Is this really the Obama third term? Is he or his close cabal really managing things right now?
I don't know if it's really the Obama cabal or if it's just a bunch of really young staffers that have been like staunch Democrats their whole life. And maybe they worked in the Obama administration, maybe they didn't. But it's really these 26-year-olds who have their own personal agenda running the nation.
Oh,
Because
Lord help us.
they're putting out all sorts of different it really seems that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and all of these different cabinet positions, all these just different White House and executive departments are doing whatever they want to fulfill whatever progressive agenda they personally have.
Oh, God. Gabe, help me out. Make me feel a little bit better from what Alec just said. Please tell me we got something better than 28-year-old, 26-year-old staffers who were doing all the work.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Obama pulling the strings directly, I think I would agree with Alec that I wouldn't say that's part of it. It's millennials but it's not Obama, I don't think, pulling the strings directly so much as his top staffers in the Obama administration. People like Anita Dunn, who was top White House in the Obama and now is one of these main people in Biden's inner circle that really would have a major impact on whether he'd stay in the race or not, and would be consulting him. People like Antony Blinken. So I think the Obama administration is essentially right. The Biden administration has been a continuation of the Obama administration, and it is largely a lot of the same people leading the country.
Yeah, Anita Dunn, and up until a little while ago, Susan Rice, of course, was a top advisor in the White House. And Jen Psaki herself also worked in the John Kerry State Department as well as the Obama White House. Elaine, you raised the question, who's running things? It is weird that Obama still lives in D.C., isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, of course. And, who knows who's actually making these decisions, whether it's a 26-year-old or Obama himself. The reality is the American people, for better or worse, elected Joe Biden in 2020 to be the president of the United States. It's not a figurehead position in this country. They are the decision makers. The buck stops with them. And so if there are people behind the scenes who are making the decisions, we didn't elect that person. The American people didn't elect that person, and they shouldn't be making the decisions. And if there's somebody in the position that can't make the decisions, then we have to take a step back and elect somebody who can make those decisions and will make them very decisively and run the government for us and govern.
And by the way, maybe make better decisions, which would be nice as well, because whatever's going on right now ain't working much. Earlier this week on this program, I speculated that if Biden's going to step down, whether voluntarily or not, it'll probably happen next week during the Republican convention. It would be a great way to sort of suck the oxygen out of the room and draw attention from what should be a pretty upbeat and positive week for Trump and whomever his running mate might be. Well, imagine our surprise when last night on CNN, Paul Begala basically said the same thing.
The president pointed the way to his speech Monday in Austin, my hometown, at the LBJ Library. Lloyd Doggett, the congressman from Austin, is the first one to call for President Biden to give up the nomination. And he has suggested maybe the president goes to LBJ's library, commemorates, he was going to receive an award and commemorate the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. And then maybe he does what Johnson did and hand off the gavel. So that's already what some Democrats are starting to say.
Fascinating. Well, let's start with that. Elaine, is it far-fetched to think that this might be the path that they take, especially in the spirit of LBJ, who famously did not run for a second term that he was entitled to run for?
I mean, I've heard the same reports that wanting to steal the thunder of the Republican convention sounds about what the Democrats would do anyway to obviously hurt Trump's campaign. It would steal the news cycle, obviously. And then it's a question of, is he stepping down just from running for president, or is he stepping down from the presidency right now? Yeah. And so there'd be kind of two questions happening. I think that would consume a lot of the air in the room. And it probably would, steal the show from the Republican convention, possibly regardless of who Trump nominates as the VP.
Yeah, I think it would definitely go a long way to stealing the show, Alec, because suddenly the story would be all about this and about Kamala Harris, presumably, or whatever speculation there might be, stepping in as the new candidate during the week where President Trump is getting officially nominated. Alec, do you see this happening?
If he's going to do it, it'd be a good time to. I don't know if they're smart enough to do that, honestly. And on a more like cynical note, I think that the Democrat or the progressives' goal is just to die in office. Honestly, I don't know if I can see Joe Biden stepping down. And on a perhaps more selfish note, I don't know if I want him to step aside and let somebody else, perhaps more qualified and more effective, run for president, because otherwise it's going to be a real walk in the park in November for Republicans.
Yeah, it is kind of ironic that most of the Trump people after yesterday's press conference were like, yeah, he hit it out of the park. Don't change a thing there, Democrats. Stick with your guy. But Gabe, do you think that this could be an effective strategy for them? Because my hunch is, since they're trying to use the LBJ model, is that he'll stay in the presidency, but just not seek re-election.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it's a pretty speculative thing that lawmaker had said on CNN. But I think one thing to consider is, sure, I think it could steal the news cycle from the convention, but I don't. It's a very complicated maneuver that the Democrats would have to do in any time, in any regard, to change out the sitting president for another candidate. And I don't know if it's an easy thing to do. And in that vein, because it's not an easy thing to do, I don't know if it's going to necessarily promote good press. I think it could be a lot of bad press. The president of the United States steps down, can't run for office. What the hell were the Democrats doing? That could most certainly be the narrative, while there's a narrative that Republicans in Milwaukee are sort of building their own coalition, and Trump nominates a vice president, and they sort of strike a muscular pose. So I think that there's one sense in which it could be a valuable time to do it, to steal the thunder. But in the same sense, the Democrats are in absolute chaos right now, and the Republicans are in a much better position to portray strength.
Well, let's speculate on what that thunder might be that could be stolen. The big announcement next week will be Trump's running mate. Let's do a lightning round here and get your impression, panel, on some of the top names that are being bandied about. We'll start with North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Elaine, from your perspective, Job Creators Network perspective, would you be happy with a Vice President Burgum?
You know, I am a Burgum fan. I think that he's a really interesting candidate, and I think he brings a lot to the table for another Trump administration. I'm not sure that he would be the vice president pick, more for the populist side of things, and that he doesn't have a lot of national name recognition in knowing who he is. I also don't think he brings a state to the table. I mean, it's already there essentially. So I sort of look at what a candidate brings to the table, statewise or vote-wise.
Yeah, I hear you. Although the whole bring a state to the table thing seems to have gone by the wayside lately. What with Pence, that was a state was already in, and Kamala Harris with California. Gabe, what do you think of Doug Burgum? I hear a lot of guys your age think that he's kind of a cool dude.
I think that Doug Burgum, he brings executive experience. He's the governor of a state. He's worked in business for a long time, so he's a longtime businessman. As far as I guess what else he brings to the table, I would say I think that it's kind of I don't know. I think the vice president. The vice president not exactly is a role that really is all that instrumental. It's very much a figurehead, and I think Donald Trump might very much prefer someone like that who it maybe, Doug Burgum not being a nationalist populist. I don't know if that really matters for Donald Trump. Donald Trump really just wants someone who perhaps can sit in his shadow. Now, of course, there's other candidates where maybe
we're going to get into the other candidates in a sec, but I think your answer is actually perfect for Doug Burgum. It's like, hey, he's a businessman. He seems like an okay guy. Yeah, I got nothing else, right? I mean, that's one of the downfalls, I think, Alec, is that he's so vanilla.
He's kind of a blank slate, honestly, kind of able to be molded into whatever is needed, which Trump might like. I think what Doug Burgum has going from the most is that he looks a little bit like George Washington, and I think that'll help the Trump campaign out, just in that regard specifically.
The Doug Burgum, that's our own Katie Pavlich, by the way, at Town Hall, who spearheaded that, and we're so proud of her for that one. I will throw this out there, because I was like, well, there's no downside. There is one downside with Doug Burgum. The Democrats want to make abortion topic number one between now and Election Day. North Dakota, under Doug Burgum, actually happens to have one of the most restrictive abortion laws that have been signed in. So it actually creates a target there, something that Donald Trump has been trying to thread a needle on for the general election. All right, let's move on to Marco Rubio, who shockingly is actually one of the top contenders too, considering kind of some bad blood during the 2016 primary between he and President Trump. But that seems to be water under the bridge now. Elaine, what do you think of the idea of Marco Rubio?
Well, I think Marco Rubio kind of represents more establishment Republican. He is also my senator here in Florida. He brings obviously interesting perspective on the voters. He could be attractive to Hispanic voters, which at Job Creators Network, we believe that the Hispanic vote, whoever wins that is going to win this election. So I think he's got strong creds for being the VP pick. I will say I disagree that this time the VP pick for Trump is sort of unimportant as in past elections. And the difference here is that Trump can only run this time. He can't run again, which means whoever is his VP pick is going to be the person who runs in 4 years to be our next president. So I think they're very important pick for Trump right now.
Well spotted. Donald Trump is basically selecting the immediate front runner 4 years from now for the nomination. You're right. Gabe, Marco Rubio is very strong on immigration, I would say, and that could be a strong pick.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that with Marco Rubio, one major thing to consider is him being the VP pick on a replay, and Dem campaigns are going to be running Marco Rubio and Trump on the stage in 2016, coming at each other pretty hard.
That's true.
Yeah, that's one thing. But I think Rubio on the immigration, he's been very tough. And on foreign policy, another key issue that I think Trump has an opportunity to come in and have a much more muscular approach on the Middle East. And China is a big issue that Marco Rubio focused on, which obviously Trump has sought to, during his administration, to really take on.
Alec, I've also seen polling that shows that Marco Rubio is very attractive to, I don't mean this in a physical way, but he's attractive politically to female voters, suburban female voters, which is a soft spot for Donald Trump's support right now. Do you think that could factor in here? Or what do you think are the other reasons why Marco Rubio is in the short list?
Well, Rubio may be attractive physically as well to these voters. I'm just not in a position to really declare that one way or another. But like, Gabe and Elaine said, he's strong in immigration. He's strong in defense. He meets a lot of the criteria that the Trump campaign published in their one-page document of this is our actual, Project 2025. This is what we're going to focus on once we get elected. I think Rubio's strong on a lot of those issues. And so he would be a real team player when it comes to the administration. And I think Elaine is also right that Trump is looking for a successor. Is that Marco Rubio? Time will tell.
Well, if you're looking for a Trump successor, then J.D. Vance seems to be the most MAGA of all of the shortlist options. Elaine, what do you think of the junior senator from Ohio, just 2 years in the position, making his way into the vice president's office?
I'm going to be pretty bold here and say I don't think it's him at all. Because he attracts the same voters that Trump's already attracting. The gaping hole here for Trump on voters is really what a more establishment politician like a Marco Rubio could attract. And remember, in every primary primary election across the country, there was always that anywhere from 10 to 20% of voters who either were anti-Trump voters and voting for Nikki Haley, or they were Nikki Haley supporters. And so looking to fill that gap, which I believe Mike Pence, what he brought to the table in 2016 was he was bringing the evangelical Christians to the table for Trump, and he needed that at the time. So I'm looking at what gaping hole there is for Trump, and then maybe a gaping hole is an exaggeration, but what he needs to fill. And I think it's not going to be another Trump-like candidate on the ticket with him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Anybody who's going to vote for Donald Trump, or anybody who's already there for Donald Trump is already there for J.D. Vance as well. Does J.D. Vance, Gabe, you think bring new voters to the table, or is Trump more interested in just somebody who's in line with him as much as possible and loyal?
Yeah, I think that was a good point, which is that J.D. Vance does attract a lot of the similar voters. In some respects, he's more to the right than Trump on certain issues. I believe on abortion, he's more to the right than Trump. So I don't know if J.D. Vance attracts minus that issue, necessarily different voters. But that is to say, if Trump is viewing the vice president as someone he wants to sort of crown as a successor, or if that's a phenomenon that's legitimate, then perhaps J.D. Vance would be a more probable person than Marco Rubio or Doug Burgum. I don't know if I really envision Doug Burgum being president. I could be wrong. And Marco Rubio, I don't really know if I also see that either, but I could also be wrong. So,
Alec, what do you think of the J.D. Vance option?
I think JD, if JD's the pick, it's a successor pick. I think if that's the move, then Trump wants to be the king and the kingmaker. I honestly don't know if the Trump campaign is really all that concerned about bringing in a new voting bloc. They're on the rise with Hispanic Americans. They're on the rise with Black Americans. And, if they're targeting these top three folks, they don't really need Vance to deliver Ohio. They don't really need Rubio to deliver Florida. And so if it's going to be a VP pick based on a successor and ensuring the Trump legacy, then I think Vance is the man.
I always come from the school that whoever the media is talking about as the short list is actually a distraction, and the real running mate is someone they're not even talking about. Let's throw some wild cards out there real fast. Tim Scott, who had been talked about months ago, you never hear his name anymore. Tulsi Gabbard was someone who was talked about quite a bit, and she's not really even a Republican. Glenn Youngkin suddenly, I think, is emerging as a real contender out of Virginia. I'll let you guys pick whichever one you want or your own suggestion. We'll start with you, Elaine.
Well, I agree with you. I think that we are going to see Trump be Trump and throw us a curveball on his VP pick. And so the three that are being highlighted right now probably will not be his VP pick. I'm a Glenn Youngkin fan. I think that Glenn Youngkin brings a lot to the table. He brings this potential state of Virginia, which I think Trump would win the election if he won Virginia. He also brings that voting bloc that supported Nikki Haley to the table. And he's just well liked, and he's a businessman. He's not an establishment politician in that regard. And then a little less likely, but I still am holding sort of not out hope, but thinking that it could happen as the real curveball is Nikki Haley herself.
Wow, that would be a stunner. Gabe, you have a wild card here that you want to choose from?
I would say I'll throw out Ben Carson. I think Ben Carson here comes back into the national spotlight after his retreat following the Trump administration. That would be an interesting pick. But I would say a more serious pick that I think that Elaine just mentioned, Glenn Youngkin, which has been thrown out. I think Glenn Youngkin is he's very popular in Virginia and has delivered on a lot of issues there, including on abortion and some other issues that have been important to the conservative base there. So I would say Glenn Youngkin, throw out Carson, and maybe that Biden-Trump unity ticket that Biden alluded to. I think that this finally might be the opportunity we can, get that. So.
All right, Alec, what's your wild card? Shock the world. It's going to be Tucker, isn't it?
No, my wild card pick is Senator Tom Cotton.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think serious dark horse right there.
It is a dark horse, but I've heard his name and Mike Pompeo's name just sort of whispered here and there, and it was announced that Mike Pompeo will be speaking from the main stage. Listen, I'm trying to read the tea leaves here. It's been announced that Donald Trump Jr. will be introducing the running mate, and he seems really on board with J.D. Vance. I'm not making a prediction, but here's what I'll say. Elaine is 100% right. Glenn Youngkin is a game changer for this campaign. He does put Virginia, it's already in play, but he locks it in, makes Biden and the Democrats spend money in a place where they can't afford to have to protect. And frankly, he appeals to those women suburban voters. That's how he won Virginia. First Republican to do so since 2009. That's his story. And if Donald Trump can figure out a way to work together with Glenn Youngkin, a successful businessman, that basically blows this entire election map up in his favor.